Good evening, everyone. I am Coral, welcoming you on behalf of Tell Me Your Story to the stories of flood and displacement under TMYS Review, September 2021. We are calling for submissions of stories, essays, and poems as a part of the project. Today, we are privileged to have Professor Pankaj Jain for a discussion on floods and religion, stories from Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Professor Jain is an internationally recognized academic leader in sustainability, Jain studies, film studies, and diaspora studies. He is a professor of philosophy and religious studies at Flame University, heading the Indic Studies Initiative. He is currently working on his fourth monograph, Modern Jainism, a historical approach, co-editing the Encyclopedia of Hinduism and a volume of Indian and Western philosophical concepts in religion. He is also the author of award-winning Dharma and Ecology of Hindu Communities, Sustenance and Sustainability, and Science and Socio-Religious Revolution in India, Moving the Mountains. His articles have appeared in several academic and popular journals and websites. He is a recipient of the Fulbright Nehru Fellowship for Environmental Leadership and Wenner Gren Grant, among many others. He hosts a popular podcast called Indic Explorations. A very warm welcome to you, Professor.
Thank you, Ms. Dasgupta. It's a pleasure to be with you here and discussing about stories of flood and displacement.
Thank you so much. Professor, I would invite you to begin your presentation if you could just initiate our audience about the presentation that you're going to make, post which you take it
Right.
ahead.
All right. So I've shared my PowerPoint. Is it visible now?
Yes, it's very much. Should I
All
bring
right.
it to screen?
Yes, please. All right. Very good. All right. So, yeah, I start the presentation with flood stories, as you mentioned, which is the
Right.
main topic. But also, I move on to, or I migrate the topic to migrations, and then immigration and diaspora and so on. So hopefully it will be interesting. And then we'll take your questions and we'll discuss more these topics.
Certainly.
Right. All right. So here it is. So when we start about flood topic or flood as a major topic, especially in Indian tradition, Indic traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, we have to start with where it all started. In our literature, the biggest flood that they talk about is the pralaya, right? Jal pralaya. Jal pralaya is mentioned in many texts, and that's where the avatar series, the incarnation series of Vishnu starts with Matsya avatar, which is the fish incarnation, is the first incarnation of Vishnu. Then goes on to Kurm and then Varaha and so on, right? So Matsya avatar finds its way first time in the Vedas, starting from Yajurveda, Atharveda, then goes on in the Mahabharata, Bhagavad Puran, Matsya Puran, Varaha Puran, Agni Puran, Garud Puran, Padma Puran, Skand Puran, and Brahma Puran. So all these texts have these the great myth of the Matsya avatar, right? And that's where the first flood is, the major flood, which is very similar in other world tradition as well, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and many other indigenous traditions across the world. There is a great flood mentioned in almost all traditions across the world. The difference here is in Hinduism is, or Hindu Dharma or Hindu texts is, that the flood is happening, but the rescuer is a fish, right? It's a fish, and fish takes the gigantic form. It appears as a very small fish, and then it takes a gigantic form eventually, and then it rescues the rare species, one sampling from each species, and with the help of the seven sages, Saptarishi, they go on to Himalayas with the help of this fish, which of course is the Matsya avatar, the incarnation of Vishnu, and then that's how the entire creation is come to light again. So the creation dissolves in a way in this Jal Pralaya or major flood, and then it sort of comes back with the sacred knowledge of the Vedas or the Vedic texts. So the texts are preserved by these seven sages, Saptarishis, all the famous names, Kashyap and Bhardwaj and Agastya and so on. So this is the savior. These are the savior. These are the seven sages that protect, defend, or save the ancient heritage of Hindu Dharma. And that's how the tradition continues. The Saptarishis find also their way into the 7 stars near the pole star. The Dhruv Tara or pole star is accompanied by 7 Saptarishi nakshatras. So they also are celebrated in astronomy in Indic tradition, which is, I think, so we are happy with naming roads and hospitals and cities, but ancient people in India were naming the stars and constellations and so on. So that's, I think, very interesting. So that is a major first story, first major myth. Myth not as a, as something false, but myth means as a, in which the cultural meanings are embedded, encoded, and this myth can be reinterpreted in many different ways. So some people might interpret it as if the sacred knowledge was to be preserved. There was some kind of a natural disaster, and these 7 scholars probably, they were key people who saved all the knowledge, all the tradition, and that's how the tradition continues. A fish could also be symbolic of the people living across the coastal lines of India at that time. Also, we know that India geologically was part of Madagascar in Africa. Then there was some major event happened, geological event happened, and India was sort of pushed back and touches to the Himalaya. So Himalaya is actually one of the youngest mountains in the world. So it sort of moves from Africa to Himalayan region, and so the whole geological movement is also symbolized probably by this myth, by this ancient myth. But it's a major myth. So the 10 incarnations, they start with Matsya Avatar, the fish incarnation, then go on to the next avatar is the Kurma Avatar, in which again there is so Earth is sort of immersed into water, and the turtle holds it back, and the turtle brings it back to the life. So that's probably the second major cycle of the creation, and the creation continues. Then comes the Kurma Avatar is also connected with Samudra Manthan, which we were discussing before starting this webinar. So in the Samudra Manthan, again, we see that the snake, the Vasuki, the snake used in the Matsya Avatar is the Sheshnag. The snake used in the Kurma Avatar in the Samudra Manthan is the Vasuki, and then again we can interpret in multiple ways, and that's how the entire tradition is saved from demons, and demons are, there's a fight between good and evil, right? Tension is common across the traditions across the world. So this is something happening here also. And then the tradition continues with the help of Shiva and Vishnu, and goes on to the next avatar, which is Varaha, and then the Narsimha, and then Vaman, and then Parshuram, and then Ram, Krishna, Buddha, and then the forthcoming is the Kalki avatar. These are the 10 avatars which are most celebrated in most of the texts. But there are different avatars also. There are different incarnation names also. This is not a fixed list. This list has been changing. All right, so that's the major flood story, which is again very reminiscent of other traditional stories across the world. So some artists have depicted this fish shape in a form of kind of a major kind of a ship, or water based vehicle, some kind of a vehicle, and all these 7 sages are being transferred with the help of this major fish and into Himalayas, and that's where the culture starts. And Himalaya remains one of the most sacred places across the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain world, probably because of these kind of stories or myths associated with Himalayas. Right, and then so now if we look at the actual history, right, the historical evidences of Indian people, or specifically Hindus and Hinduism, that have migrated, not just because of the flood, but because of their own ambitions, their own adventures. We know that the Chola Empire had spread beyond India. And with the Chola Empire, or Chol in Hindi, Chol Empire, Chol Samrajya, or Chol Vansh, Chola Empire, right? So the major patrons of the Tanjore Shaivite temple, Shaiv Mandir, Shaiv temples in Tamil Nadu, they took a great, because of their empire, Hindu ideas through trade also, and also through this empire, Hindu ideas spread beyond India all the way to Malaysia and Singapore, Sri Lanka, even Maldives, and even Myanmar. So all of these places, they had had these invasions in different parts of Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. That's how Hindu ideas spread, and people spread. And so if we go even today to Malaysia or Singapore or Sri Lanka, Maldives, Cambodia, Vietnam, even Philippines, we find several reminiscences, several Indonesia, of course, Java, Sumatra, Bali, all these islands, all these countries have many, many ideas that are spread across Southeast Asia. So this migration, immigration, moving of Hindu ideas have been happening for centuries, so because of multiple reasons, trade or even military reasons, or the invasions that happened by the Cholas as they spread their empire. Right. So Cambodia, Indonesia, and beyond. I mentioned the second point. Third point, I want to come to the British Raj, history of the British Raj, which led to indentured laborers. So they simply hired, they just filled their ships with people, especially from UP, Bihar, and northern India, probably Bengal also, and many, many hundreds of thousands of people were moved across the continents, right, to all the way to Suriname and Fiji, Mauritius, Guyana, Jamaica, Trinidad, and so we see the first sort of or second, we should say, Chola Empire probably the first, and second, probably the second major way of expansion of Indian people happened, or Hindu people, mostly Hindu people in this indentured laborers, huge numbers, was the second, during the British Raj. That's how the people and the ideas and traditions spread across the world. And even today, we find, for example, Diwali is being the national holiday in Trinidad. And a major new language form developed in Suriname, for example, Suriname, which is a combination of Bhojpuri from UP and local dialects in Suriname. So interesting things happened because of this migration. And then, of course, when United States opened its visa laws, its immigration laws in 1965, and then eventually the tech wave came with the technological boom, or many hundreds of thousands of Indians spread across America and beyond. And now we find in America, for example, there are more than 1,000 Hindu temples, almost more than 100 Jain temples. And so we find Hindu Jain ideas spreading because of this technological boom also. So if you look at some of the maps, the Chol Empire or Chola Empire was prominent from 9th to 13th century CE. And the actual empire was, again, of course, dominated in India, in southern India, Tamil Nadu and Andhra, but it spread all the way to Patliputra and Bengal. So Bihar, Bengal, Odisha, Kalinga is Odisha, right? And then Andhra Pradesh. So all of these areas were under the influence or even under direct hegemony of the Chola Empire. And as you can see, Sri Lanka, major part of Sri Lanka was occupied or influenced. Also influenced were Malaysia, Singapore, Cambodia, Indonesia, and Thailand, and Myanmar, and all of these areas. And of course, Maldives is not shown in this map, but that's how widespread the Hindu ideas through Chola Empire were from 9th to 13th century. And so because of that expansion, we find similar events such as Ram Leela still being played in Indonesia, Thailand, and so on. And of course, with Buddhism, which we'll get to, the ideas kept spreading across Asia. All right, then the next slide I want to show you is Hindu migration. Again, because of this Chola Empire and beyond, we see that the Hindus, of course, the heartland is India. But because of this expansion, we find these ideas spreading all over Southeast Asia, all the way up to Philippines and Brunei and Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and on, and even Afghanistan, Gandhar. So there is a book by Anne Malala, right, the youngest person to ever get the Nobel Prize. In her autobiography, she mentions the Buddhist stupas where she was growing up on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. So she mentioned that those Buddhist ruins are her memories growing up in that part of border of India, Pakistan and Afghanistan, northwest frontier. That shows that Buddhism had a very strong presence even in Afghanistan. And as we know, Bamia Buddha were destroyed very recently, like probably 20 years back, by the Taliban. So Buddhism had a very strong presence across South Asia also. South Asia and even across Asia. So yeah, we'll get to Buddhism in a second. So, but this is, so far we are seeing the spread or migration of Hinduism and Hindu ideas across South Asia and Southeast Asia. Today, if we look at the Hindu population across the world, before we get into Hindu population, we should also mention that the largest diaspora in the world today is Indian diaspora. The largest foreign remittance to their homeland by any community is the Indian diaspora is the largest diaspora now in the world, more than Chinese, more than Japanese, more than Jewish, of course. It's such a huge diaspora. So because of the spread of Indian people across the globe, and we can see some of these countries that where Indian people and mostly Hindu people are now living. Of course, Canada and United States, Suriname and Trinidad and Jamaica and Guyana and all those countries in the Central America, South America. So even South America has a major presence of Hindu or / Indian people in Suriname. Then of course South Africa, because of the indentured laborers. Australia, probably because of the tech boom and how people migrated to Australia, and then of Southeast Asia we already mentioned. New Zealand, of course, also, and on. And of course in European countries, Middle Eastern countries, because of this widespread presence of Indian people being the largest diaspora in the world, we see Hindu, Buddhist, Jain ideas spreading across the world because of the diaspora and because of the migration. Now let's take a look at the Buddhism and how it spread. First of all, I want to show you this image. Sorry, this image of one of the probably the largest statue of Buddha in the world is in China, and that was flooded recently because of the probably climate change based events or disasters. And that first time the feet of the Buddha were touched by this flood waters in China recently. That's just the image that I received. I could find if I search for flood and Buddhism, the real flood of the Buddha statue. Buddhism, as we know, spread for the first time after the death of the Buddha within a couple of centuries because of the Silk Road. Buddhist ideas spread far and wide, all the way to Central Asia, to South Asia, Southeast Asia, to Far East Asia. One of the reasons Buddhists had to spread beyond India, so within India, their presence is very minuscule. But because of many scholars have argued, including Professor Lalmani Joshi, and in my own article on Huffington Post, we have mentioned that as Hinduism started its revival with Adi Shankaracharya and so on, and also because of the Middle Eastern invasions, Buddhists had to eventually leave the mainland of India and they moved to Tibet. So if you look at this map, from Bodh Gaya, they moved up to northern India. From northern India, the Tantric Buddhism reached Tibet. From Bodh Gaya, the Theravada version of Buddhism, Theravada branch of Buddhism, sect of Buddhism, came to Sri Lanka. From Sri Lanka to Myanmar or Burma. From there to Thailand, to Laos. Laos, one branch went to China. In the northern Asia, the Buddhism that spread was Mahayana Buddhism. In China, Japan, and Taiwan, and so on. That's the yellow color. And then brownish is the Theravada Buddhism, which is also called as Hinayana in the older texts. So in the southern Asia is all Hinayana and Theravada. So this is again another depiction of spread of Buddhism across Asia, across Far East Asia. Here is the Silk Road map, which shows that how India was connected with Tibet and China, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan. Pakistan was not there, but present-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, Persia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, all the way to Greece. So because of the Silk Road, we see the Buddhist ideas spreading across Asia, all the way up to European countries. Then we also find the major travelers or explorers such as Wensang, Fayan, Marco Polo. They all kept looking for India and its wisdom traditions, and they were all looking for example, Wensang, whose monument I just visited last month in Rajgir in Bihar. So Bihar government, Indian government, and Chinese government are still celebrating the on-foot migration of Wensang all the way from China to India. Almost 10,000 miles he walked round trip from China to India and back to China. It took him more than a decade to travel, and he collected all those wisdom traditions, all those texts, books, and he took it back to China, where he learned Prakrit, Pali, Sanskrit, and translated many of those original texts into Chinese, where they are still, so in China they are still preserved. So that shows because of the Silk Road link, Wensang and Fayan and Marco Polo, people like explorer like them could come to India, get Buddhist ideas, and spread beyond India to China especially. Right, and then this is another picture of another view of Buddhist ideas. So the red arrow is showing the Mahayana, green arrow showing Theravada, again in Southern Asia, red arrow is in Northern Asia. Blue is the Vajrayana Tantric Buddhism. So Buddhism comes in 3 different flavors, 3 different forms, and how they spread across Asia. From India to Pakistan to Bactria, via Gandhar to Bactria, and Mongolia, all the way to Mongolia, all the way to Japan, but Japan gets it from Korea. Korea gets it from China. China gets it from Tibet. Tibet gets it from Iran, India, sorry, and then Bhutan, Nepal, and on and on. Okay, Buddhist diaspora today is shown in this map. So we see again the movement, migration, immigration of Buddhist people across the world. They're mostly in Asia Pacific countries, but they're also in Middle East, North African countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, North America, and even Latin America has some Buddhist people. So that's again shows you how people have been migrating across centuries, Buddhist ideas. And finally, this is the in Buddhism section. This is the one interesting quotation I found from Samyutta Nikaya. There's a Buddhist text in Pali, and in that it is mentioned that monks, there are these 4 floods. Which 4? The flood of sensuality, the flood of becoming, the flood of views, and the flood of ignorance. These are the 4 floods. Now, this noble 8-fold path that was taught by the Buddha, obviously, is to be developed for direct knowledge of, comprehension of, the total ending of, and the abandoning of these 4 floods. Which noble 8-fold path? There is a case where a monk develops right view dependent on seclusion, dependent on dispassion, dependent on cessation, resulting in letting go. He develops right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, dependent on seclusion, dependent on dispassion, dependent on cessation, resulting in letting go. This noble 8-fold path is to be developed for direct knowledge of, for comprehension of, for the total ending of, and for the abandoning of these 4 floods. So flood is given, I think, very interesting meaning here in the Buddhist tradition, where flood can be that which sort of destroys you, by this sensuality, sensual pleasures, by this drive to become something instead of focusing on being, by different views, different angles, different perspectives that can divert or distract your meditative state of mind. And of course, the ignorance itself is the biggest flood. So how to avoid these 4 kinds of flood? By following the eightfold path as taught by the Buddha in the 4 noble truths that he taught. The 4th truth that he, out of those 4 char Arisatya, or 4 noble truths, the 4th one was the eightfold path. That's what we get from this text, this quotation. Let's come to Jainism. And Jainism also is one of the ancient traditions of India, coming from Indian civilization. Not much is known about Jainism outside India as compared to Buddhism and Hinduism, which are much more widely known. So I always try to also focus on Jainism also. Of course, Hinduism and Buddhism are much more already widely known. So Jainism it's a very interesting history also. The last major teacher, the 24th Tirthankar, was almost contemporary of the Buddha. And after he passed away, after he attained his enlightenment, 6th century BCE, somewhere around that time, around the Maurya Empire, from 3rd to 1st century BCE, which means from a couple of centuries after Mahavira passed away, we see that the Chandragupta, or most likely Chandragupta Maurya, the founder of Mauryan dynasty, Mauryan Empire, he moves to southern India. So from the Jain sources, we see that Chandragupta Maurya adopts Jainism, and he moves to Shravanbelgola in Karnataka, near Hassan, in the Hassan district, where he apparently performed all the Jain rituals, Jain practices, Jain meditation, Santhara, and so on. And then that's the first major example of movement of or migration of a Jain person or Jain emperor from northern India, Patliputra in Bihar area, in northern India where he was, and Mauryan dynasty was around Bihar. We see the movement of migration all the way to southern India. That's the recent picture of how, I think, interesting picture where most likely from Mumbai, where flood is very rampant. Every monsoon we get this major flood, and Jain monks are also trying to save themselves in this flood. And then so Mauryan Empire was from 3rd to 1st century BCE. Then the Gupta Empire, Gupta Samrajya, was from 3rd to 5th century CE, and that again was focused in Bihar. But around the Gupta Empire, we see again another major migration of Jains all the way from Bihar via Madhya Pradesh or Malwa into Rajasthan, Abu and Palitana in Gujarat. And from there, they go again further south into Shravanbelgola, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, where it flourishes, the Jain tradition flourishes in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka the most in the southern India. So then because our topic is flood and migration, so it's very interesting. I came across another research essay, research article by one of the senior scholars in Jain studies, Professor Paul Dundas in UK. And he argues that most likely around the Gupta Empire, Jain people were, they compare their status with natural calamities and flood. And they find their refuge in southern India. They were not, apparently they didn't feel as welcome in northern India as they were in southern India. So they all moved, many Jain people moved from northern India, Bihar area to Ujjaini, Madhya Pradesh, present day Madhya Pradesh. From Ujjaini they go to Vallabhi in Gujarat and to Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. So that's what I mentioned in this map, in this slide. This is very interesting. So their social condition, social situation of Jains is compared with flood, which is what is the topic that you have chosen for this webinar. So we see.
So these movements were happening because they wanted to escape the flood areas?
No, so flood is kind of a metaphor. And flood, Professor Paul Dundas argues that this flood is being compared, is being used to describe their social condition or social situation. They were not no longer as prominent. Jain tradition was very prominent, or remained much more prominent in southern India. But around the Gupta Empire, around the Gupta time frame, the Hindu tradition or Vedic tradition became more prominent because that was what was being patronized by the Mauryans and by the Guptas, especially Guptas. Right, so that's what. So they decide to move away from the Gupta Empire onto southern India, and then. So that's what we find even in today's India. Most Jains or most Jain pilgrimage centers are centered around Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Karnataka is not shown here, but also Karnataka. Those are the places where Jains are more prominent. They are no more prominent in Bihar. No longer prominent in Bihar or Bengal or UP. Some parts of Western UP, the adjacent to New Delhi, but Bihar, which was the major sort of original place for Jains and Buddhists, is today hardly has any presence of Buddhists and Jains, which is very interesting. Why did they migrate from Bihar all the way to Western India or Southern India in the Jains case? And in the Buddhist case, they just left India and moved on to Tibet and other parts of Asia and so on. Now Buddhists are sort of finding their way back into India by three major figures, which I didn't touch upon, but I want to mention the name of course, the Dalai Lama in Himachal Pradesh. Goenka brought the Vipassana tradition from Myanmar, Burma in a major way back to India. And also Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, kind of a political Buddhism, which also was revived in Maharashtra. So these are the three major figures in the last 100 years that have revived Buddhism again, in my view, in India. Now we see Buddhist circuit is spread across India in Bodh Gaya in Bihar, Kushinagar in UP, Sarnath near Varanasi in UP, Sanchi in Madhya Pradesh. In Mumbai, there is a major stupa near Borivali. In Kalinga, in Odisha, there's a major stupa also in Odisha. Then in Ajanta Ellora, there Buddhist monuments are being preserved very carefully. So, and of course in Karnataka, there's a major Buddhist monastery which is flourishing in Karnataka. In Dehradun, there is a major Buddhist center. So Buddhism is fine. Of course, in Dharamshala, Dalai Lama is still living, which is great. So so Buddhism we welcome back as Dalai Lama came back and as Goenka came back from Myanmar back to India, and of course with Dr. Ambedkar. So these are the movements of Buddhists from India to Tibet and now back to India, and movements of Jains from northern India to southern India and then into western India. This is a map of Jain people in America. So there are at least 100,000 Jains spread across America, mostly in California, New York, New Jersey, Texas, and so Arizona, and so on. This is another map. This is already now old, 11 years old, but this is from the Harvard University Pluralism Project. This map is also I found online, where Jain people spread across the world in America and South Africa, Kenya, Dubai, Belgium, United Kingdom, India, of course, Australia, and some in Thailand. I have been to Jain temples myself in Japan, in Thailand, in Nepal, and of course in America and India, and I've heard that there is a major Jain temple in Belgium also. Jains have been leading the trade of diamonds across the world. So Jews and Jains have a major prominent place in Antwerp in Belgium also. So because of that, there's a major temple in Belgium also by Jains. All right, so that's the Jain diaspora, and this is a map shared by my friend Manish Mehta in Detroit, and that also shows the presence of Jains across Asia, Jordan even, and Kuwait, Dubai, Kenya, and Australia, Malaysia, Thailand, Japan, and Nepal, and so on. And that's all I have to share. And then we can, of course, take your question. I want to end with the major Mahavakya from one of the Upanishads called Charai Veti, which is a combination of three words, Chara Eva Eti. Chara Eva Iti. Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, which probably inspired the Bengali song Ekla Chalo Ro. Ekla Chalo Re. Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Yes, which is celebrated probably by Bankim Chandra or by Tagore, I forget.
Ekla Chalo Re is Tagore.
Is Tagore, okay, yes. So that's the sort of the theme of Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains. That's how they spread across South Asia, and then across Asia, and now across the world, becoming the largest diaspora in the world. So natural calamities is one reason for their movement, but also their own ambition, their own adventure, their own movement because of their political empire or economic ambitions and so on. So that is all I wanted to present in this presentation. And now we can discuss more of your questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Jain, for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I will start with my questions now. And my first question that I had been thinking of asking you is, there are, little that I have studied, I find that there are lots of common stories, or at least the philosophies are common or the preachings are common across religion. One very direct reference that I can give you is that of Manu in Hinduism and Noah in Christianity.
Yes.
And I could find similar such things. I would like to know from you whether religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, the origin of all of which are from India, and India being a land of rivers and hence river basins, which are often prone to flood. Do you see such kind of flood stories which are actually talking about environmental, the need of environmental consciousness? And if yes, what are they preaching, all of these stories?
Yes, so one of the major floods that I already mentioned, right? That's the Matsya Avatar flood. So there is this Jal Pralay, right? So at the end of every cosmic cycle, there is a major flood which sort of dissolves the entire creation, right? And then there are some sages. So in this case, 7 sages, Saptarishi, they preserve the knowledge and then pass on to the next cycle. That's the biggest flood myth that we find, especially in Hindu tradition, of course, with Manu. And Manu is the protector of that fish that comes in his hand, and then the fish grows. Now that could be symbolic of a sort of a river-based community or ocean coastal community, which is very small in the beginning. And as the community grows, they move probably from south to northern India, to Himalayas, who knows. So we're talking thousands and thousands of years of this development of people. Some people say that, and we saw in the Jain case, for example, that people moved from northern India to southern India. But the Manu story probably is indicating that as fish grew, the coastal community from ocean or from Arabian Sea, or now what we call as Arabian Sea, there was no that word that time. But so people are probably moving from southern India to northern India, to Himalayas. So because of the flood, or who knows, because of the community that just spread of the community or enlargement of the community, it just moved to northern India. One more major example that we didn't mention is the Indus Valley civilization and then how it collapsed. Many scholars are still struggling with the question, but there's definitely one reason could be the climate change. And who knows, climate change was linked with the major flood that came to Indus Valley civilization, the Indus River, or the Sindhu River, as we call in Indian languages. Sindhu River was probably flooded in a major way, and people just left from Sindhu Ghati Sabhyata, Indus Valley civilization, present-day Pakistan, to Gangetic Plain, the Ganga, Yamuna, present-day UP area. So that could be one reason why they stopped living in major cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, and they moved to smaller village-based economies or even culture. So we find little evidence of any major cities as people move towards the Gangetic Plain. But the Indus Valley civilization originally was a city-based, urban civilization. How that happened? So I don't have actual stories as you were asking, but I'm just sharing from historical evidence what happened in Hindu history. Yeah. So that's another major example of people moving probably because of a major flood And we know that Sindhu River or Indus River even today is always, almost every year, it's a major flood there is. So probably that flood led to this movement or migration of people from Indus Valley civilization to Gangetic Plain. So present day Pakistan to present day Uttar Pradesh in India. So that's another example. Those are the examples that are coming to my mind based on flood.
Professor, I was reading up one of the folk tales which has been attributed to Buddhist monks.
Okay.
And it is, that story goes like, there was a community stranded in an island, and there were two heads to that community. One was a foolish head and one was a wise head.
Okay.
And then there were spirits in that island which had told its people that you will have to keep the island clean, because if you make it dirty, a giant wave will come and engulf everything. It will be a disaster. So they were scared, but the foolish head said, "Don't worry, nothing like that can happen. Have you ever seen such giant floods in the ocean?" And the wise head said that let's be precautious. So the wise head had a boat, had prepared a boat. The foolish head didn't. And so when they littered around the island, the wave did come. The foolish one and his followers died there, and the wise one and his followers survived.
Were saved. Okay.
Yeah. So these are some kind of folk tales which are, of course, there in every kind of thing. But I wonder that so many years ago, when probably the earth was far more cleaner compared to what it is today, because of many different factors. How come was it that it was so important so many years ago, or how did it come to people that environment can be messed up, and if such mess happens, environment will come back to avenge that? I mean, how do you think that happened so many years ago?
Because that's a great question, and I mean, we can only speculate what was going on in their mind, right? In the ancestors from millennia ago.
Yeah.
I think Indus Valley civilization has, I think, one indication that probably, who knows if the Manu story is connected with Indus Valley people, and they were so tired of those floods coming to Indus River every year that they just built this huge boat or some kind of a vehicle, and they just moved from somehow they moved from Indus River to Gangetic or Ganga or Ganges or Ganga and Yamuna, what we call in Indian languages. So this movement, this migration of people from one river basin to the other river basin probably also indicates. And then they were, again, as I was hinting, they were not spread in one city. We don't see a major city, although Varanasi does have a long history, also 6,000 years of history, non-stop, continuous history, also Varanasi. But we see mostly people were spread across villages. They were mostly more migratory culture after the collapse of Indus Valley civilization, as scholars have argued, have shown. Nobody knows for sure. They are all speculating. Indus Valley remains the biggest mystery, one of the biggest mysteries in the world. We don't know exactly what we can speculate what happened or what might have happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Professor, can you recollect any of the practices in either or all of the three religions that are friendly towards nature and those that are harmful towards nature? And I ask this because I think that there's a lot of lack of consciousness towards what we are doing. We do things because they are rituals, they are taught to us by our elders, or because we are habituated without thinking what will be its impact on the environment. So if you could point us some of the rituals that should be advocated and those that should be condemned.
Right. There are many, many rituals that if we really practice it consciously, like the word that you use, consciously, with awareness, it can really bond us with nature. So all our, for example, probably not all, but most of our major pilgrimage centers are all inside the forests, on top of the mountains, Badrinath, Kedarnath, Gangotri, Yamunotri. Those 4 Chota Dham Yatra, as they are called in Uttarakhand. Devbhumi is Uttarakhand's another name is Devbhumi. So those 4 are actually origins of Ganga and Yamuna. Ganga comes from Bhagirathi, Alaknanda, Mandakini, And of course, Yamuna comes from as Yamuna. So Yamuna, the origin of 4 rivers, is celebrated by making it major Char Dham. Char, they call it Chota Dham. So probably our ancestors were really interested in making sure that people go back to the origin of river, pay their tributes, pay their respect, reverence towards these rivers, and especially the origin of river. And then the rivers, they all end up in Ganga Sagar, the major delta near Bengal, Bangladesh, the delta area. That is another major pilgrimage center. Every Hindu is supposed to visit Ganga Sagar and all these 4 dhams, Badrinath, Kedarnath, Gangotri, and Yamunotri. Rivers where they start from, rivers where they end, all they end. And then across the river path, we know that so many pilgrimage places, Varanasi and Allahabad, Prayag, and so many are littered across India, not just around these rivers, but even Kaveri, Godavari, every river is treated like mother. So river and water is so much reverence is being given. But what is happening in present day India? We are throwing plastic in them, which is such a disaster. Thankfully, now plastic is one single-use plastic is being banned in India. Hopefully, it will come soon. So it is for each up to us, right, to really practice these traditions with consciousness, awareness, or end up throwing plastics in our mother rivers. That's the disaster that we are facing. Similarly, Kanpur, for example, has these leather industry, and all those chemicals is being diverted to Ganga. Or Varanasi, the sewage water, which never went into Ganga before the British Raj, but the British Raj came and some local official decided this is the most convenient way to get rid of the sewage. So all the entire Kashi sewage and started being thrown into Ganges. So all these disasters happened in last 100, 200 years because of our lack of awareness, lack of reverence. If we can really bring that consciousness back, this awareness back, we can really bond with our natural resources, our rivers. Then let me tell you another major festival of Odisha, ancient Kalinga, which is present day Odisha, and now it became Odisha. The spelling has changed. There is a beautiful festival called the Rojo Parbo in Odia, right? So Rojo is the menstrual cycle. Parbo means festival. So they practice this festival every year in which they are giving a break to Mother Earth. This is the break time. This is the vacation time, so to speak, for Mother Earth. She needs a break. So we will not till the land. We will not do any farming, no agriculture. We'll just sit together as a village. And Hindus and Muslims both celebrate this. Wow. And they will just pay our reverence, our respect, our tribute, to Mother Earth. So such beautiful, great examples of these rituals, festivals are littered across India. We just have to, go look for them and practice them more consciously. Rojo Parbo should not lead to more garbage being generated and more plastic being thrown across our land. So these are some of the major examples, and on and on. So we have, for example, festival to worship even reptiles. Nag Panchami, the 5th day for the Nagas, for the cobras, right? We have Bachh Baras, we worship even the cow, the cattle, and on and on. So elephant is one of the associated with the Ganesha, the elephant god, and monkey, Hanuman. So all these different species are made into this pantheon of divinities across the Hindu tradition. In the Jain tradition, for example, also every Tirthankar is associated with an animal. So Mahavir is associated with lion. Then vegetarianism is number one prerequisite to being a Jain. Do not cause any harm to any other being in the universe for your own survival. Take the minimal of earth, minimal of air, minimal of water or fire energy, and only plants, because those are the one-sensed beings. You are not supposed to cause any harm to 5-sensed beings, mammals or reptiles, but only one-sensed being, that too very minimal, very carefully. Even among plants, you're not supposed to kill any root-based plant, so no carrot, no potato, no onion, no garlic. Take only the byproduct of a plant. Do not cause the harm to the entire plant. So then again, it's a preservation, protection of plants, even plants, of course, a protection of all mammals. And similarly, Buddhism goes great length to promote non-violence and so on. So these are many, I can just go on and on, but these are Bishnoi people, another great example in Rajasthan, where they have most famous case is Salman Khan, where they have been fighting this battle. How dare Salman Khan touch their black buck? How can he be allowed to kill a black buck just for hunting, for entertainment? There is nobody has any right to kill any animal, any being in the universe. Forget about the black buck. Even any being cannot be harmed for our survival. So that's Bishnoi community. Another example. I have a whole chapter on Bishnois in my first book. Then the Swadhyay Parivar in Maharashtra, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, they have built new sacred groves. So let's build more forest-based islands where we all revere the forest, the earth, and so on, the water, and so on. And the Bhil community have their own sacred groves, and they have preserved their forests for centuries, for millennia, and on and on. Sacred groves are again littered across India. So all these are great examples. We should be more conscious, aware about these communities and these traditions. And I think we can still save the whatever environmental resources that we have. India remains the only land outside of Africa where we can find lions, rhinoceros, tigers, leopards. All these large beasts are found only in Indian natural habitat, in addition to Africa. Nowhere else in the world. Lions are all gone. Tigers are all gone. Tigers are still there in some part, but lions and rhinoceros, they're just so inspiring even to mention that Assam still has rhinoceros in their natural habitat, right? Lions are still present in Gujarat, which I recently visited by the way last month. So it is because of, I think, this non-violent traditions, because of this natural harmony with natural other species and acceptance of all species. I think those are, I think, some of the reasons that why these large mammals have survived, why India remains one of the biodiversity hotspots even today in, for example, Sahyadri in Karnataka and Himalayas and Assam and elsewhere. And so all these are, I think, still great examples where people have preserved their natural resources for millennia.
Absolutely. I have two very specific questions from Hinduism. These are the things that I have grown up wondering, and I wanted to put them across to you.
Sure.
One is the story of Samudra Manthan,
Yes.
which I found was, as a child, I found that very disturbing because Samudra Manthan is like churning the ocean, which means disturbing the creatures in the ocean. And then the mountain was tied to Basuki, who's a Naga, and hence a part of the environment. So Samudra Manthan was something from which we got Amrita. Amrita came out of it, and many other beautiful things came out, gems came out, many other good things came out. But then that is such a disruptive phenomena when it comes to environment. How do you read that as a part of, the mention of this Samudra Manthan in Hindu religious texts, how do you see that in the frame of environmentalism?
Right. So that could be one way to read that myth mentioned in Kurmavatar, the turtle incarnation of Vishnu. Turtle becomes the device or instrument that churns the ocean. And so yes, of course, that could be one way to read it. Or alternatively, who knows if they were, again, we're talking, who knows what happened exactly, or it's just a myth or just a story. But we can also interpret it probably as a form of some kind of a cleanup operation. Who knows? Maybe the ocean was so polluted and they all wanted to clean it up and get rid of all the dirt and all the pollution from. So even today, if you want to really clean the rivers, we'll have to churn them somehow, some way to clean them up. Who knows if that can be treated as a cleanup operation of the ocean, and after that everything became so clean, and the people who were polluting probably were all removed and destroyed by the people who were trying to clean up the whole ocean or the natural resources. And in that effort, apparently turtle and the giant cobra, the Vasuki, were also helpful to humankind, and they all collaborated and maybe cleaned up the entire ocean. That can be one way of reading also. And then similarly, like the fish incarnation, and this could be the turtle incarnation. This is the second incarnation of Vishnu. We also see this evolution from fish to turtle to boar to half man, half lion, and so on. So this also showing us how which compares well with the Darwin's organic evolution, also how people or the species evolved from being in the water towards being in the land, and then the full man, and then the more peaceful man in the form of the Buddha. So it's also showing that evolution. So turtle or the Samudra Manthan is one of the stories in this whole evolving set of stories also. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. There could be multiple ways to read.
Absolutely. My last question to you, that in Hinduism, most of the devas and devis, they are some forms of nature.
Right. Yes.
We are worshipping the sun and the
Yes.
moon, and so
Earth
in
and yes,
some way or
water.
in some way or the other,
Rivers,
these are.
trees. Yes.
But when it comes to worshipping, we do worship the devas and devis, but forget to conserve nature.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
What do you think is? I mean, is there a way, or what do you advise, if I may put this up as a very strong statement as a part of this conversation, that what do you advise in order to convert people from idol worship and you know obsessive religious from that obsessive religious activism, can we turn them into environment activists? Is
Yes,
there
we
a
should,
way?
we must. That's the only way to save India and save the world. So that's why I focused on the three communities that are doing it for centuries now. Bishnois, the founder of Bishnois, moved away from worshipping. They don't even have an idol, no murti in the Bishnoi temples. It is just this reverence for nature that they're practicing for centuries. Swadhyayis are building new tree temples, new sacred groves. Bhils have also preserved their sacred groves. So these three communities, which is part of my first book, Dharma and Ecology of Hindu Communities, that is exactly what I researched. And similarly, many other major gurus in present-day India, Sadhguru, for example, Jaggi Vasudev, did this rally for rivers. I don't think they have built any major new temple where Murti Puja is to be conducted, like the word that you're using, idol worship. Idol word we don't prefer to use, but Murti Puja is not being promoted, I think, by major new gurus such as Shri Ravi Shankar, Padmanabh Shastri Athavale, founder of Swadhyay Parivar, Jambhoji of Bishnoi community few centuries back, Jaggi Vasudev, and so all these new gurus or new age gurus, if you want to use that word, they're all promoting, I think, real connection where we can really harmonize our consciousness with the global consciousness, right? Jiva and Shiva, Jiva and Brahman, which is the basic philosophy of Hindu tradition, the Advait Vedantic philosophy, where this harmony, if we can achieve, if we can really be in sync with the global consciousness, the universal consciousness that is Brahman, all these issues of environmental and so on awareness will automatically come. That is their emphasis, which is great to see that they are promoting the rally for rivers, for example, which really raised consciousness awareness about the rivers and how rivers are dying in India. And then governments also join in that effort, and people are trying to save the rivers, whatever rivers that are left. So yes, of course, absolutely. If we do more rituals, that too, creating more junk and plastics and so on, that's a recipe for disaster, right? But every time nature is telling us stop, even this pandemic is telling us stop consuming animals, be more conscious, do not waste fossil fuels. If you can do through Zoom or global Google Meet, do it through that way. Don't drive and don't just keep polluting our cities, our villages, our world. So nature is telling us, knocking us every time, and we must listen, and we must really become conscious about the way we are living, the way we are worshipping, like you said. That is the only way to go. Yes, but yeah,
Absolutely.
we have to all try very hard.
Thank you so much, Professor Jain. This was a really, really interesting session, and some very important insights that I got were.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting, and hopefully it was worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I had a wonderful learning process while you were talking. So thank you so much for making time for this. And we look forward to receive the submissions of stories, essays, and poems on displacement and rehabilitation of flood victims under TMYS Review September 2021. Please stay safe. Please make sure that you are safe yourself, because your safety might make everybody safe. Other safety depends upon your safety. It's one for all and all for one. Please take care and have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.